to press one button. At every live stream, there's one button I forget to press. And then we don't have audio, or we don't have video. In this case, it wasn't video. So now we're all live. And let's see if people in the chat are seeing us all live. I'm going to go quickly into the chat. I have a lot of windows going on here. Let's see if we're live. If we're live, let us know in the chat. Yeah, I think we're live. We're finally live. It's great. Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Let's see if everyone can finally stream in. Where are we? We're not live for some reason. Okay, hang on. Looking into this. It's not a good live stream if you don't have some technical difficulties. Oh, perfect. Okay. Maybe just a little bit slow then. Okay. Yeah, I think we're on now. I'm starting to see people shuffle in. You are muted according to reports, so I am going to unmute you. And
so you can tell if I'm muted.
Yeah, I think you're good now.
Comment if I am still muted, please. Actually, tell me if I'm not.
Let us know. It's funny, I was doing a conference a few days ago, well, just last week, and I got on stage, and it was one of those conferences where they load the slides for you. You don't get to bring your own computer. And they loaded the slides, but they set it to the last slide. So every time I used the clicker, it just exited the slideshow. And no one could figure it out. And I'm on stage, and I'm just talking to the crowd. And eventually we got it sorted out. And I think that really humanized me. And everyone just closed their laptops, closed their emails, closed their Slack, and just listened to what I had to say for 15 minutes. Which I thought this was great. What a great opportunity when something is broken to actually turn it into something powerful and useful. So maybe this is the same thing happening here. Not by, yeah, okay. So I'm seeing people shuffle in. I think we're all good. It just took a few more seconds. Stuff is happening in the chat. We have a chat coming in from LinkedIn. We have chats coming in from YouTube. So let's get back to basics. Hello, everyone. I'm Ariel. I'm starting a little bit late. I have peachy green tea in my cup, which is very different than normal, but I'm trying it. And Kurt, next to me, you got water, right?
Yes, pouring plain room temperature water. I hydrate very much, but I drink it out of a bike bottle probably more than I should, but I'm a cyclist and that's my shtick.
I actually prefer water at room temperature too. I don't know. I can't do cold water. I can, but I don't want to.
No, I can do cold seltzer, but I can't do cold water. It's odd. Yeah. No ice water for me.
I'm the same way. I don't like cold seltzer, but I'll do cold seltzer before I do warm seltzer. So that's at least something.
Yeah, that's fair.
Cool. So we have a great topic for you today. We have a very interesting topic, a topic that not enough people talk about. And the people who do talk about it in reverse, in my opinion, because they start at the beginning and not the end. Obviously, that's reverse. And we're going to clarify some things up. So we're going to talk about search engine optimization and app store optimization. They both have optimization in the name, so most people confuse them, or at least think they're similar enough that one can do the other and one can do the other. And that's rarely the case. If you have tried this before, you know that you can just take search engine optimization, copy and paste it into app store optimization, and get downloads. You can try, but most likely it wouldn't work. The tools are different, the nuances are different, and there are many nuances. So I invited Kurt here, Kurt from Willow Tree, to talk about search engine optimization. Kurt does a lot of search engine optimization and recently more app store optimization. Who's better to tell us what the differences are, what the similarities are, and how to actually bring them into an organization that might be used to one over the other. So welcome, Kurt. Thank you for joining us. Tell us more about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. So I've been doing SEO for 15 years, ASO much more recently, but I lead the practice here at Willow Tree. We do part of the analytics and optimization team within the marketing services organization at Willow Tree. And we we're different from your typical SEO digital marketing agency in that we are a product agency. So we do everything from the start of the back of napkin strategy, design work, engineering and building, then deploying, launching, maintaining the apps with a heavy emphasis on user inputs and all the marketing that can kind of go along with that. So from everything from push notifications, email strategy, obviously SEO on the web, as well as app store optimization. So we kind of cover all the entire gambit. And it's really, we found to be more exciting to actually have that baked into the project at a very beginning. So we have a clear understanding for how users are either searching the web for any given content, or in this case, searching around an app. And we might also have a little bit more research that we can, quantitative research we can pull in to help inform how we should design it, what kind of features we should deploy with it too. So very data driven in our approach, and it definitely is a key piece of how we kind of go to market as well.
That's really cool. I mean, everyone knows that I love data, and everyone knows how much I try to base decisions off of things that make sense as opposed to just gut. So that's awesome. And it's actually very unique because there aren't many agencies, even these days, that do both web and SEO really well, but also ASO really well. I think it's one of those things both grew. I mean, for those of you who don't know, I used to do SEO way back in the day in what feels like a previous lifetime. I did that for years, and it was much easier back then. These days, it's not at all easy. In a sense, ASO is where SEO was 15 years ago, in my opinion, maybe a little bit more. So it's kind of cool. But they kind of developed on their own tracks, and the two tracks are somewhat parallel, but also one is way ahead of the other, and the tooling and everything you can do is so different. So these days, when I talk to agencies and they either focus on ASO or focus on SEO, it makes sense to me. But I love seeing the combination, because ultimately we're looking for downloads, and downloads can come from the web, they can come from the store, they can come from a variety of places. Why not try and get all of them? And as the companies grow and the brands grow, you really don't just want to focus on one place, because then you lose out on massive audiences. So this makes perfect sense to me. How long have you been doing ASO more in line with SEO?
It's been just a couple of years. You know, we've actually deployed a lot of apps that didn't require a lot of ASO work. So there would be a lot of, you know, businesses that were just using it for employee resourcing and things where, you know, growing your app download wasn't really a major KPI for them. So, but a lot of the more consumer driven side of apps that we've started to deploy, you know, we service the quick service restaurant industry pretty heavily, in travel and media, financial services. You know, we don't get much into the gaming side of things, but there definitely are a couple of exceptions to that rule. Media streaming has been a big part of what we do as well. And we generally work with pretty larger enterprise level brands. And so a lot of them come to the table with really very, very strong brand awareness as well. So, they're driven heavily by, you know, the brand searches that take place. And I think that's a unique sort of difference that you see in how people search within the App Store comparatively to how they might search in Google.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny that you say just a few years or just a couple of years, because from my perspective, it's only in the last couple of years that these larger organizations, the big brands, are finally picking up on ASO, and they're saying, oh, so we need it. We absolutely need to have this. And the answer is yeah, of course.
100%.
I was talking to brands back just before COVID started, and some of them were just getting into ASO. And it was the SEO teams that were doing all this, and they had no idea how to do it. And it was kind of a much newer, greener field for them than SEO was. And in a way, ASO is very limited in the tools you have and the things you have to optimize. And we'll talk about all those today. So I totally get why this was a very slow start. But it's great to see that now more and more companies are picking up on it. I cover a bunch of companies who are using ASO, very large names too. and the success they're getting on my newsletter, my weekly newsletter, This Week in Apps. So you can definitely see an uptick in this. I would also love to see some of the smaller apps use search engine optimization to get more downloads, because brands know this very well, but some of the app first newer companies, even the indie developers, they don't really realize how powerful the web is, and we'll talk about that too. So let's get started. Let's talk about ASO and SEO. You've done both. Where do you see the similarities and where do you see the differences? And then we'll dive into the nuances, because the nuances is really where it's all changing.
Well, I mean, like SEO, it needs to be data driven. You got to better understand how your users are actually searching within the App Store, just the same as if we want to better understand how people are searching Google or Bing or Baidu. And being able to have an informed data driven strategy that says, okay, our brand name gets this amount of popularity comparatively to, these features that are very applicable to our brand, and looking at that and the competitiveness of the score. It's similar to how SEO is done in many ways. We get competition scores for basically paid search, but it helps better inform how competitive that term might actually be organically as well. But then the interesting piece is that, we get a lot more specific data from Google through their ads API that helps like very granularly tell us how many people search by month for, going back as far as 4 years. We don't really have that kind of trend understanding within the App Store, at least currently. And I think that's something that, is a limitation, but, like all things, like you said, it's kind of a walled garden, right? Within the App Store, we have a certain amount of limited creative and resources that we get, levers that we get to pull, whereas SEO is a wild west of all kinds of things, and it's constantly changing. So I think what will be interesting is how that all evolves in time, just because we're seeing our kind of world shift and change a lot, particularly with AI. And I'm really curious to see if that starts to affect or comes into play in the App Store search itself one day. So we'll see. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer to that, but to start out, to boil it back down, like just using data to drive your decision making and better understand what your users are looking for is really key.
Yeah.
I think anyway, I'll let you ask the next question.
Well, that is definitely the key. You said so many things I want to just expand on just a little bit. So you mentioned AI, and we were talking before the show, and we said, should we talk about AI and this? Should we not? We said, let's see how the conversation evolves, because I have my feelings on AI. And as someone who does a lot of writing, I have a lot of feelings about AI and writing and ChatGPT. As someone who I imagine you've done a lot of this too, you kind of know firsthand that AI can't really do what a lot of people want it to do these days, especially for SEO. But I would love to hear from you, the audience, the viewing audience, in the chat. Do you use AI for ASO or SEO? If you've seen my live stream on ASO and ChatGPT, did that work out for you? And if you want us to talk about AI, I'll be looking at the comments at the chat as we do this. And if you have any other questions, drop them into the chat and we'll touch on them. But going back to your answer, so there are similarities in a sense that at the end of the day, we are working with engines, search engines and search engines that look at text and try to understand what the intent is of this text. On the web, you have a lot of different intents. People come into Google and they say, how do I do this? What can I do with that? And on the App Store, people usually say calculator, or they give you what they want immediately. Less of a conversation, more of a very strict, direct intent, which is already one of the biggest differences in my opinion, and what makes research for the web and research for mobile very, very different. But also, when it comes to search engine optimization, for those of you who haven't done it, you said the wild, wild west. We can add wild, 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 many wilds, because you have so many opportunities to show Google or Bing or really any search engine that you're optimizing for what your content is all about. So if you want to be found for a certain set of keywords, you write a few articles about those keywords on your website, you make sure that the search engines know about them, and there are a few techniques to how to elevate those up the ranks. You can't do that on the App Store or on Google Play at all. You only have the one landing page. And that's not true on Apple now. You have multiple. You have product pages, but they're not indexed by Apple. And so you only have the one, really. And if anyone says different, they're mistaken. because when you drive people into the store, or when people are in the store and you want to drive them into your app, you have a name that's 30 characters on Apple and Google now. You have a short description or a subtitle, and then you have either a keyword list for Apple or your description for Google, which gives you a little bit more flexibility, but it also is not as important. So ultimately, you barely have anything in comparison, and that's where the differences start to emerge. In your strategy, then the campaigns that you've been working on, how do you take the learnings from the web, and do you take the learnings from the web and try to migrate them to ASO? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that yes, that there are learnings that come from that. Thinking through a recent app store optimization campaign that we did, we had a client in the quick service restaurant space that launched an app that was very much, for, most QSRs, you buy it, you download the app because you want to order food, right? Like people know what they're getting when they download that. But it was also very important that it was a rewards program. And so we realized quickly that yes, there are people that actually are very much interested in just knowing about the app and searching Google for that specifically, but there are also people very interested in the rewards program and have very specific different queries. And so you can kind of use that Google search data just to better understand whether or not you need to create two separate landing pages, which is in this case what we did, versus something that might just be a singular app landing page. And that's all you have is run through all the features. And then from that data, you can better understand how people are searching around that. That can influence a little bit of what is done on the App Store itself. But I would say it's probably a little bit more the inverse. So we get more intel, I would say, from how people search to a certain degree, but also the user reviews that come through, I think is a fascinating aspect of intel that we can pick up on that helps inform how we can better design the app, build the app, what feature requests might exist out there, which then might influence the landing pages that we generate on the web side of things. So to me, I think that's the untapped resource and a part of ASO that obviously we want to improve. We want to get more of those those reviews and those ratings just because how they can influence rankings. But it's also what we can learn from that and being able to kind of discern the information, distill it down, and then feed our product team and engineers and designers to know what they should be kind of put into their backlog for future builds.
That's a really interesting view and a really interesting perspective. Most of the people that I talk to, they say we take what works on the web and we try to then use that in tooling to research if it also works on mobile. But this makes so much sense. Taking the intent, because the intent is so clear on the App Store, and it's one of those things that you can't find as easily, and backporting it through the product into marketing is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah, and we're working on some interesting AI powered tooling to kind of better discern that information more quickly. But it's definitely a fascinating place to be able to kind of learn what your users are looking for, and I think it's an untapped resource that not a lot of brands actually put a lot of energy into thinking about. And for those that are not responding to those reviews, I would just say start. There's a lot more to it than that, but start, please.
Absolutely. I actually have a whole guide on how to respond to reviews for those who are not exactly sure how to do it and they're not exactly sure what the tone should be. And that was actually one of my first guides because it's such an amazing resource both to read and to reply that everyone just has to do it. If you're not responding to reviews, let us know in the chat why, if you have a real reason. If you don't, that's okay. I think that taking the learnings, those intents, directly from reviews is a very interesting way to find keywords as well. And that's something that I do when I help people with their ASO. When I try to put them on the right track, I say, what are the words that your users are searching for specifically? Like, what is their language? Not necessarily what you think your product does, your app does, or your game, or not what you think the values are, because you might describe them in a way that makes sense to you, but users will have a different way to go about it. And we have tools that do this. They scan the stores, they scan really every possible word they can find, and they put it into, and they start tracking it. And what happens is you can then look at all of your competitors and kind of get all those learnings directly in one view. So you don't really have to muck around too much and read, because if you're reading reviews for your own app, you can also read reviews for a competitor and see what their users are missing. That's something that I talked about at a conference last week. And I think it's a very powerful tool as well, especially if you bring that back into your screenshots, into your keyword list, into your name, into your subtitle. We had the BBC on the live stream here a few months ago, maybe last year, and they were using those tools to find different ways of talking about the kind of thing that their app does and getting in front of more users, because there was one word that they didn't think about. They started using it and boom, like magic. And that's because their app is pretty big. So if they introduce new keywords, they grow really fast. But at the same time, they didn't have them before, and then they did. So that's just a pure win to look at those keywords.
Yeah, that's a really good insight.
Now, beyond that, what would you say are some of the similarities that everyone should keep in mind as we do this? So you take the learnings from one to the other, from ASO to SEO, the reverse, as some would say. Is there anything else that you see that can be used if you already have all that knowledge of SEO that you can take and you can translate into App Store optimization?
So I think the goal setting is a really important part. Obviously, improving visibility for your brand, getting higher rate of downloads is all important as well. I think ultimately making sure that those KPIs are aligned fairly well across the different channels in which your marketing teams are working is really just important to have that North Star. And it's really easy to have sort of diverse goals that exist across teams. And to a certain degree, I think that's important, but you always have to have that singular North Star, I think, that you need to focus on. And more often than not, especially when the lion's share of your business comes from the app itself, app downloads can definitely be kind of that North Star. It's not always the case, but certainly it could be. So ultimately, just making sure that your marketing team is sort of rowing in the same direction is really crucial. That you're thinking about it when deploying, making sure that the content development that you're deploying on the web is reflected in the emails that get sent out. And that when you're talking about the app, that promotional campaigns are aligned, that your creatives, your screenshots that you have, that maybe you're deploying on with each release, or maybe even A/B testing, making sure that promotional campaigns are sort of being leveraged in the app stores just as much as you're trying to do through email, web, paid search, and everywhere else. So having that sort of singular strategy across all the different silos is going to be really crucial.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the main challenges that I've seen in the past, especially with these sort of kind of like parallel but not really parallel types of ways of getting more downloads, is that the expectation is very different. With search engine optimization, you might be able to get results pretty fast, but really it takes a long time in order to start seeing real momentum build, especially if you're starting to build from scratch. And with ASO, you can see results overnight, almost within a few hours, just because of the speed at which the stores actually do their indexing. Well, mostly Apple. Google's a little bit slower. I remember that on the web, it used to be a lot faster back many, many, many years ago. But now it's a lot slower. Now it's one of those things where you just need to build a lot of momentum in order to get started. How do you convey that sort of the difference between, we're going to start today, it's going to take a very long time, we're going to build something, and then the next day they might see their app #1 for an important keyword, be like, that's it, we did it, no more work, you're done.
Yeah, well, I think that's another similarity right there you've highlighted, is that setting expectations is important for both. And that, we do see particularly SEO as a long game. Like you can optimize a page, but it might take weeks before you actually get traction. You might start showing up, getting impressions, but you may not rank well for a while. And so there's a lot of other, different tactical things that you can do to kind of move the needle on that. But I think communicating that to internal stakeholders is pretty crucial, and making sure that they have a clear understanding that it can take time to be able to kind of see those changes, and just make sure that you're also separating, I would say, as best you can when you have big promotional campaigns from, launching major tests, that you're changing the app title, for instance. It's hard to be able to kind of pick out what's winning when you have a sudden increase in downloads that's coming from because you've, doing this huge promotional campaign. So that's something that is something very much to be mindful of. I hope that answered the question. I feel like I kind of segued there a little bit, but
No, you touched on a few things that I want to touch on that include custom product pages and how those integrate with search engine optimization and landing pages on the web. But before we even jump to that, there's a question from the audience. Let's see if I can bring it up. Yeah. Chris is asking if app review replies should be keyword optimized. Yes and no and maybe. So from a technical standpoint, on the App Store, the reviews and the replies are not indexed. So no, it doesn't really give you any sort of benefit. On Google Play, however, reviews are being read for App Store optimization purposes. I don't understand the reason for this. It's just as if Google opened up the market for gaming. They just said, game us, please. And some apps do that. And those apps get penalized usually very much. So while I would say you don't really have to think about it in that sense, the idea behind using those keywords is really using the language that your users are thinking. And so if you are thinking in their language and if you're responding in their language with their intents in mind, I think it's going to be a lot easier for them to understand you. And it's going to make communicating with your users something that's very important, obviously, a lot easier. That's kind of my take on it. What do you think about this, Kurt?
Yeah, well, actually, a question I have for you, Ariel, is doesn't sentiment play into that as well? The keywords that are used by the reviews, positive and negative sentiment can actually affect rankings as well.
I haven't seen that happen at scale. So maybe something could be causing this, but I haven't seen this happen across the board too much. Although Google changes how they use keywords all the time and what they do with the descriptions specifically. They go well beyond the basic, let's just repeat this keyword 6 times and move on with life. So maybe, but I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah. No, I mean, I would say that, if you're thinking about the keywords in your review response, it's good that you're putting thought into how to respond, but I would focus on just treating that user as a human and really trying to, as best you can, curate a bespoke answer that tells them that you're listening to them. And I think the same could be said for, whenever you put out a new release, thinking about the release notes, just don't write bug fixes and performance enhancements. Like explain how you've been listening to the users, bullet out the things that you changed or the bugs that you may have fixed, that as a sort of indirect way to be able to show users and respond to users that you're actually listening to them and paying attention to what they're asking.
I feel like release notes are such a lost art. They used to be everything that big companies who were trying to look cool would invest so much time into. And I know people who spent days just working on release notes for some of those companies. And then auto updates came around and no one reads them anymore. So you'll still see some companies do it, but for the most part, they've become so dry.
Yeah, they are. It's nice when you see a little brand voice come into it too. We've seen some brands that actually do a good job of that, So make it funny, make it unique. People actually do look at it. So I think it's something that you can put energy behind. And quite honestly, that's a great use case for AI. You're not going to hear me talk about using AI to write content very much, but release notes is probably something that you could summarize down to a full few bullets based on whatever tickets you're actually pushing.
Yeah, I think we'll get to AI. I want to talk about custom product pages, and then we'll talk about AI. There's another question from the chat, and Benjamin is asking, let's see what is going on here. We'll bring this up on the screen. How many downloads do you need to get to see ASO changes that fast within a few hours, but really a day, maybe 2? Benjamin says we have between 50 and 100 downloads, and it's hard to move up in any keywords. So you actually don't need to have a lot of downloads because downloads are not the currency of App Store optimization, which sounds crazy, but it really isn't. That's what it's all about. Or that isn't what it's all about. It's all about ratings. So if your app doesn't get enough ratings, then it will be very difficult for you to go up many keywords. But it also depends on the keyword. So if you're going for something really competitive where you can't compete because you don't have enough new ratings or because the optimization that you have is not exactly identical with the competitors and not beating them. For example, if you're going after a very competitive keyword and you put it in your subtitle, where the top results put it in their name, you just won't be able to do it even if you had a bazillion downloads. Unless those bazillion downloads turned into a bazillion ratings, and then you would have a little bit more flexibility. Obviously, this is very scientific, but I write a lot about how ratings turn into ranks and how downloads don't matter over on keyword teardown. So if you want to get your app up the ranks, the downloads are less important. It's your DPR that you want to watch out for, and you want to make sure that you have a higher DPR than your competitors, which will give you more ratings for your fewer downloads. Hopefully that makes sense. But that's how I would go about doing that. Do you have any suggestions to add to this, Kurt? How do you get started with something like this?
Yeah, no, I think your answer is pretty spot on. I think the they're going to be correlated. The hope is that the more downloads you see, the more people are interacting with your app. Therefore, there's going to be more people interested in ratings and reviews. And I think it's just about having a proper prompt strategy, thinking about really what's the best part of the user journey when they're using your app, to be able to submit for a rating or a review. And immediately after they download it is definitely not the time to do that. They need some time with it. They need some time to spend using it, and making sure that they're actually interacting with it before you actually prompt them for a review. Otherwise, for at least for me, I'm just going to hit X every single time and move
Yep.
on. So I think just being thoughtful for when you need to ask for that is really kind of the way to start driving more ratings.
Yeah, and just to add to what I said before, it's a lot of people when I say ratings and reviews, they think they're overall ratings, the average rating and maybe the total ratings over time, but it really isn't. It's only the new ratings over the last 30 or so days, and the actual rating, the average, matters very little. So if you're getting a lot of negative ratings, it's still going to be good for ASO, and that's because it's a signal to Apple, in this specific case, Apple, that people just download your app and they're using your app. Whether it's good or bad, that's up to the person, but they're using it, and that's a good thing. So that's why it floats up. A similar thing happens on YouTube. If you leave thumbs up to a video, which you should do for this one if you're on YouTube, you're watching us on YouTube. If you leave a lot of thumbs up, the video will rise up in search results. But if you leave a lot of thumbs down, the same exact thing will happen. So if you really want to hate on a video, leaving it a thumbs down is not going to do that, which is a good thing. I'm not going to tell you how you could do that, because then you can, no, I'm just kidding. If you don't like a video on YouTube, you leave it in the middle and you don't watch it all the way to the end. And that's not something that you see on apps, at least not on the App Store. So on the App Store, you don't have this mechanism of full engagement leading into ASO, but on Google Play, you do. So on Google Play, if you have an app, if you manage to get a lot of people to download the app, but then it crashes or they uninstall immediately, you're going to drop in the ranks. Just something to keep in mind. And tying that back to reviews, if you know what users are looking for, you're more likely to keep them. So if you're trying to lure them in using some sort of a, even maybe misleading marketing on a landing page on the site, just because it was easier to get that to rank in Google, it doesn't mean that you're going to keep those, to turn that into ASO ranks and keep those downloads. Something interesting to keep in mind. There are more questions in the chat, which I will try to get to, but before, I do want to talk about custom product pages and how they relate to landing pages. So on the App Store these days, you can have multiple pages for your app. Custom product pages, and they're not indexed for search, which means that what you do on them, the language or everything else, that's not being put to good use. But if you're driving traffic from the web into your app, you want to have that flexibility in case your app does multiple things or serves different types of audiences. And on the web, you can have as many landing pages as you can. You can optimize all of them. So if I have a food delivery app, I am probably selling different types of food into my app. And I know that in some markets, maybe Mexican food is a lot more, will get a lot more traffic than Chinese food, for example. I live in New York, so I have all those foods next to me. But if you have that, then you could then, for your SEO, set up a landing page that's a little bit more focused on maybe the imagery and the language, focuses on one food versus another. And then you can drive traffic to the App Store to a store page that's kind of similar. Have you done anything like this, and do you think it's worth the time and effort?
Yeah, I think that having, that integrated strategy is really crucial. And,
That was
any
easy.
kind of deep linking that can be done certainly is important. I
Mm-hmm.
think There was an interesting analogy that I've heard from one of my clients that described sort of the users that come to the website are kind of they're in a dating relationship with the brand, but the users that are actually download the app, they're more of in a committed relationship. And so if you think about that, there's loyalty in that aspect. And so moving more people from the website, at least in this particular vertical, was a way of driving more loyalty and hopefully repeat visitors and customers that come from that. And so I think very much as you can to enhance the web experience, particularly on the mobile end of things, is thinking about what your strategy is to try and drive more people into the app experience as well, and keeping them there, which also goes back to all the points we've talked about of like listening to what your users are saying, deploying new features based on that feedback, fixing bugs, so on and so forth. So, but I think that's where SEO can be really helpful too, is just how are users talking about your app? And sometimes it's not all just keyword research, but maybe you need to go into Reddit. Maybe you need to explore YouTube. That there are definitely a lot of brands that get a lot of hate and a lot of love on YouTube, and that can be, a qualitative data source for being able to kind of pick up on, pain points that they're discovering and things of that nature too.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how everything goes back to intent and back to data, because ultimately that's what you need for both of these types of strategies, even if the implementation is just, well, very much different.
Yeah. I mean, the way we look at it, search, be it SEO or ASO, is an extension of user experience. The once upon a time, qualitative user research was done, and you would just drop a person like on the homepage of a website when they were doing testing. And our point that we've made and sort of affecting change at WillowTree too is just to help people understand, well, the user journey doesn't start there all the time. In fact, for a lot of companies, it starts in many different places, and you have to think about how your brand is represented in those mediums, and be it Google, be it, Apple and Google Play, or quite honestly, YouTube. That's the second largest search engine. So how your brand is represented there is also really important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's a question from the audience I'm going to bring up on the screen from Jiri saying, I have seen in one of your previous videos that links do have some impact on rankings in Google Play. Is that still true? And how big of an impact do they have? And that really ties into having multiple landing pages and really SEO in general. So to give some context around this, Google, because it knows everything on the web and knows all the relationships between websites, will also know the relationship between websites and their Google Play Store. And so when there is an app, or when there is a link to an app on Google Play from a website, that relationship actually can help, probably hurt also, but more help if it's done right. And what they do is they look at the link itself, and they look at the text inside of the link, and they try to understand, why is this link linking to the App Store? What is this website that's linking to the App Store? Is it authoritative? Should we take this as oh yeah, this app is cool, people care about this? And in my experience, those links actually do make an impact. I've seen this happen both on the positive and the negative side. Again, one of those things that on Google Play, you can impact negatively how apps are without owning the app. So you can really ruin it for a competitor. We're not going to get into that because I'm more interested in how to get more downloads, not less downloads. But on the more download side of things, when there are other websites and blogs and landing pages that link to your app, Google sees this as a positive. This app is popular. And that's really, at the end of the day, what the algorithms are trying to do. Because if you think about it, there's so many apps out there. And there's so many apps that carry the same keywords, use the same type of intents. How do you rank the top one? If you do it by downloads, the same app will always be number one, and you have no variety in your store. There's really no other way to do it. And so they use a combination of the keywords, but also the ratings, and also all these signals that say people are using this app. And that can change up and down, and that's what drives those ranks. Have you seen this also, Kurt, on your end, where inbound links are making an impact on ranks on Google Play?
Not as much directly. I think, because we're a product agency, we're also more focused on sort of the factors that we can control a little bit more. I've never been a fan of link building within SEO, and I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for that. But I feel like, if you build something well, you do produce good content, you'll get the links that come from that. But
Mhm.
ultimately, I think thinking about, just delivering the proper features that your user base is looking for, like having a really good QA strategy and making sure that your performance is solid, that's also super important. And just making sure that, if all those things, if you can avoid like, high crash rate, these are all like super important to the user experience. And I think
Mhm.
that's where you really need to spend more energy on rather than these indirect factors, which, can influence things, but, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at it, to be honest.
Fair enough. I do like this. I do like the build a better product and make sure that it's visible enough. So don't try to game the system, but make sure that it's visible. In my previous life in search engine optimization, I hated link building. It was one of those things that worked really well back in the 2000s, and you had to do it, but it just wasn't fun at
No.
all. And it was all it wasn't organic in any way, even though it seemed organic. And over time, Google also de-emphasized this a lot more for search engines. So I imagine maybe even on Google Play, this will become less and less relevant as we move on and everything is evolving. Focus on building a better app and focus on building an app that doesn't crash, because back to what I was saying before, you will get penalized for that. That's really important. But also an app that isn't uninstalled immediately. So we talked about custom product pages. I think it's worth investing in custom product pages. I think it's less important to think about inbound links and how those reflect. And the other thing that came up was AI. So we have to talk about AI. I think that's something that at this point is all the rage for all the wrong reasons. So I did a live stream on how to use ChatGPT for App Store optimization. And my conclusion was that you can use it, but it's not going to do it for you. Now, if you go on YouTube these days and you look for ChatGPT and SEO, you'll find countless videos that say that it can do it for you and it will do everything. It's going to be amazing. It's going to write content for you. It's going to pick out all the keywords and it's going to do everything that you think is tedious. Or if you have never done a SEO, they'll say you can do everything that needs to be done for SEO. That's not the case at all. Do you agree, Kurt?
Yeah, no, I think that there is a really good place for these large language models to help make things that we do in our day-to-day lives faster.
Mm-hmm.
Auto completing my emails and helping me write better emails. I mean, that's something interesting. I think distilling information down into
Mm-hmm.
TLDR form is really valuable. And I think, like I said, like taking a lot of technical documentation from, your latest release and being able to distill that into release notes. That's a way that you could be a time saver for being able to do that. But I think that it's yeah, if you're using AI and just copy pasting straight out of ChatGPT, you're just going to, in the long term, lose touch with what it is that you're writing. There's a human element that comes with developing content that I don't think is going away. And there's a lot of naysayers that may disagree with that statement, but I also, have a background in creative writing, and so there's a certain aspect of the written word that it's very important to me, very holy, for lack of a better
Yeah.
term, that I think you just can't replace with something that's just amalgamating what exists already and putting it into a different form and spitting it back out at you. So yeah, for content to development, there are things that can enhance the speed to publish, perhaps, or ideation phase.
Mm-hmm.
But more often than not, I think the best use case is distilling down lots of information into something that's meaningful, understanding trends, which I think you could use that eventually for tooling that takes query data from Google, for instance, and tells you what trends it's seeing, how people are searching. Arguably, you could do the same thing with review information and distill
Mm-hmm.
down how people are talking about your brand or your app.
Yep.
So there's a lot of power that you're going to see with AI from that, and there's definitely some things that we're trying to build at Willow Tree as well that will help do that.
Yeah. We're actually working on something very, very cool for reviews. We like the idea of, if you're trying to understand a market, one of the easiest ways to do this is looking at the existing apps in that market. So we can summarize all of their performance data. We have all those estimates and all the other performance data that they would want, that you would want to look at. But we can use something like ChatGPT to summarize that all into a sentence. But then we can also take all of the competitor reviews and understand what's lacking in the market, what's excelling in the market. And it's a lot more difficult than just giving ChatGPT a whole bunch of reviews and saying, give me everything interesting. We've been working on it for a few months now, so hopefully we'll be able to put it out soon. And I know my dev team who's listening to this, they're going to hate me for even putting it out there. We're trying to keep this, we don't want to set expectation too high. But yeah, exactly. You didn't hear this from me. It's not like it's on video or anything, but it's extremely useful. And as someone who does a lot of writing, I have multiple newsletters, I do a lot of scripting for my videos. I know that you can't write with ChatGPT. You can't have it write for you. And it's actually an argument that I have with my brother, who's my co-founder, about this. I do a lot of writing, and he does a lot of AIing. And from his perspective, it makes perfect sense. And from my perspective, it really doesn't. It's not that you just lose. You said you lose touch with your content. It's that it's not your content anymore. It's someone else's content regurgitated into auto-completed sentences by something that you instructed. And I think that's the mistake. AI is not that, especially not what we have now. The large language models, ChatGPT, it's kind of like a typewriter. I think moving from a pen, or moving from what they had before. So you can use that to write faster. You can use that to find more correlations between data, and then use that to make more sense of what you're writing. And in general, it's really good for ideation because it has a bunch of ideas, and more ideas than what some people would have as they get started. And that was kind of my conclusion for what you can do with ChatGPT for App Store optimization. I'm working on another video for that where I take that to the next level and really coming up with a good starting point for everything. I think that's really good when it comes to AI and ChatGPT specifically and LLMs. I think the future might be very different, and maybe in the future this will be it. But anecdotally, one thing that I tried immediately when I was working on my original live stream for ChatGPT was I said, how do you do ASO? And it gave me back all of my tips from one of my articles. So I realized I can't use that because there just isn't enough knowledge about App Store optimization that isn't mine on the web. And so it's going to be very difficult for it to invent new things. But giving me ideas for keywords was very, very useful. And the same can be said for SEO. I think a lot of people, a lot of videos that I watched online on YouTube say use it to write articles and explicitly tell it how many repetitions you want for a specific keyword, and then how much variety do you want around the keyword. And you can totally do that. I think that content is going to be unreadable for humans. So people will come in and people will leave. And just like we said about Google Play, when people do that, Google doesn't see it as a great, yes, this is awesome. They see it as a, no, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have put that up, all that. In that rank. So that's, I think, where things kind of break up. Have you used, are you currently using AI for any of your, to automate maybe some of the tasks or to help you with any of the things that you're doing that are not secretive, of course?
Yeah, of course. I mean, tasks, yes, internally, like I said, large data set analysis, I think that's a really useful tool for it. But, let's say I'm exploring a new brand or doing, a biz dev proposal, and exploring, maybe even doing some competitive landscape analysis, like getting up to speed, particularly in something that I'm not as familiar with, in a vertical. That's a great place because I'm basically having a conversation that's going to spit back some information that is in a summarized form that can be useful. Now, I say that can because you also have to be mindful of hallucinations, which is always, or until they fix that problem, that's going to be something that you always have to be careful about, because not knowing whether or not you're just getting a convincing answer that's actually patently false is something to be mindful of. Like if you ask App Store, I'm curious, like when you asked ChatGPT what were the tips for App Store optimization, were there anything that came back in the answer that actually were just plain wrong? Yep. Because yeah, and that's, I think, a perfect example. Like it sounds really good, but it might not actually be true. So yeah, the rubber, yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? The phrase I'm looking for, the idiom, where the rubber meets the road. You really just have to pay attention to the truth.
Yeah, I used to use a combination of Google and ChatGPT. So I would start because I feel like I can ask ChatGPT about things that I know nothing about, and it will give me all the right lingo, and then take that lingo, throw it into Google, and then get some more actionable things to do. But over time, and I've been using ChatGPT ever since it came out, and I use it probably multiple times a day for things. It's become a lot better. So now I trust it a lot more, but I only use it for things that I have some knowledge, minimal knowledge about. And if I don't, then I'll go and throw that into Google just in case. I asked it about ASO for the App Store, and it told me that descriptions are really important, and you have to optimize your keywords in your descriptions, which is true for Google Play. It is not true for Apple. So if you take the time and you invest because you listen to ChatGPT and you take all the time that you need to write a good description, which requires time, you just wasted all that time and nothing will come out of it. And what I see when I see people doing the wrong thing and having the expectation that it will work is at the end they say, well, ASO doesn't work, or SEO doesn't work, or link building doesn't work, or writing content doesn't work. Even email marketing doesn't work when you do it improperly. And I think that's the biggest of all evils is it does work if you do it right. And doing it right is very challenging in some cases if you don't know how to get started. So that's a good point. You got to watch out as you get started. But I think overall, it's extremely useful when you put it to the right task. Now, going back to one of the biggest questions that I think will also need to be resolved over time is how do you bring ASO into an organization, into a campaign for a company that is mainly focused on SEO or has been doing SEO for 10 years and they don't really understand what ASO is, and like, we have an app, why wouldn't it just succeed? How do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. There, like I said, there's been a lot of clients that we work with that, they've not really their app is servicing like their employee base or something along those lines. But for those that are really like quick service restaurants, the travel industry, and other gaming, of course, there's so much competition in the app store for different types of queries that come from that I think, you really do need to look at the data. If you can get a better understanding for how people are searching around whatever service or product that you push out through your app, understanding the non-brand sort of opportunity that exists comparatively to the brand side of things is pretty important. And that's one of the differences. We don't get as much level of detail in the app stores themselves and the keyword level data that's there, but on the SEO side of the house, we definitely get a lot more detailed understanding, by month. So we get to see, even trending data. But I think having a better understanding of what the opportunity exists to start, and a tool like App Figures is great because you can understand how people are searching for the popularity and the competitiveness of any given keyword, and better having that as your starting point for how important would an ASO campaign be for my business is really important. Like I said, for some verticals, like, you might drive a lot of conversions through web, but it could be 10x that on your mobile app. And so if that's the case, also looking at the balance of where your business comes from, then maybe it's not even a question about whether you do SEO. It's just how much do you want to dedicate to having a fully staffed resource to be able to kind of do that. It does make sense to bring in an SEO because I think there's enough of an overlap for how people search, and we have a sense of user intent, and that lends itself to being able to do ASO. That's a good starting place if you don't have somebody that you've hired directly for doing ASO. But I would say, taking the time to do it thoughtfully over time, just like SEO needs to be, they're both, one other similarity is that they both are kind of like a garden. It does require tending from time to time. And, you'll have new competitors come into the space, or, the psychology of how people search shifts. All that can change over time. And so paying attention to your ASO strategy is crucial, because you can't just set it and forget it and just expect that you're always going to rank for something. You've got to monitor it. That means having some reports that coming in and having some tooling that understands that, and being able to adjust your strategy as the market shifts is going to be really crucial too. So yeah, like I said, start with data, better understand what the opportunity is, and then go from there.
Yeah, I think that hits really checks all the boxes because when you think about it, every company wants to have more visibility. Visibility is downloads, visibility is revenue, visibility is page views. And so showing other visibilities and showing how the market is and what the opportunity could be should be an easy, oh yeah, we have to do that. Why didn't I think about that on my own? Well, that's why I have you type thing. And that's been what I do all the time is I just look at the numbers. If the numbers make sense, great. If the numbers don't, we can try and set it, but that's a very easy way to look at it. Something that I looked at recently that is somewhat related is Apple Music Classical launched on Google Play, and I want to see the difference between downloads, and they're really crazy. They're really low on Google Play, and versus what happened on the App Store. And I was thinking, but is there really a big market for classical music as a standalone app, not as a part of Spotify or Apple Music or Pandora, one of those? And the answer is no. There are maybe a handful of competitors in the classical music standalone app, and they're getting very few downloads. So to have a standalone classical music app doesn't really make sense. So if I'm Spotify and I'm thinking, should I follow Apple's move? The answer is probably no. And that you can easily look at the numbers and say that, unless you're Spotify and you're trying to come in and use and leverage your brand to start something new. And that's a whole different conversation. I don't think that is, should I do it or not? That's how do I do it? So yeah, the data definitely makes it a lot easier. That's why we obsess over high quality estimates, because there's this knowledge in our industry that the estimates are directional, and directional doesn't really give you that sort of scale. If you don't know what the right scale behind estimates are, then they're kind of useless to understanding. Should I go into it or should I not? It's just, is it growing or is it not? But we obsess over them, so ours are not directional. They're way better. But I'm very biased, so if you want to check them out, you can go to see. We actually just recently opened a lot of our estimates. So if you go into our top apps and you click on any app, you will see estimates for the previous month, both revenue and downloads. And a lot of people have said that they're really on point, which is a part of why we open them up, to get some feedback. So interesting. We'll drop a link to that in the description later. Okay, that was a small tangent. How did we get to here from AI? I don't even remember. Is there we're almost out of time, but is there anything else that you think is important when you are thinking about, you have an SEO strategy and you need to bring ASO into it, or you have an ASO strategy and you want to bring SEO into it, that our viewers should keep in the back of their minds?
Education, I think, is really important. I was having a conversation yesterday with one of our clients that they're not doing App Store optimization. They're not doing much in the way of ad targeting either. And
Oof.
yeah, I mean, there are just so many large brands out there that exist and just are wholly dependent upon all of their marketing channels that exist elsewhere, or not even just understanding what the opportunity is. So I think just simply, if you're discovering this video and that you just need to get a senior level stakeholder, a 101 view of what ASO is, I'm sure there's plenty of that exists on Ariel's channel here. But I think my point is just like, build a one pager, put it together, build a use case, see if you can get access to data, do a trial on App Figures or some other tool, and try to point out like, okay, here is our app, and this is how popular we are for our brand, but then these are the features that people are searching for around our app, and that kind of will serve up a little bit of how it could be an opportunity for your brand to actually do ASO work. So the education piece is really key, because I think to the whole point that we started this, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion about SEO, that's for sure. I know that, but ASO, I think, is in a similar boat.
Yeah, just it's confusion to a different level because of how new it is in the industry. I think that all makes perfect sense, and I would love to see more and more companies do both, because there's just so much in terms of what they can get for downloads. And people ask me all the time, what can I do beyond ASO to get more downloads? And Google is amazing. And that's SEO, obviously. I've talked to a bunch of developers who got into SEO after talking to me over the last few years and are seeing really good results, whether it's because they're making tutorials about things that their app does, or even beyond landing pages. So stuff that is directly searchable. And in that sense, they can do less of the actual SEO part and more of the content creation, and that works really well for them. You pair that with a really good landing page, and now you're getting both the people who are looking for the intent, because we're kind of trying to take the intent out of the App Store to Google, but also the people who are looking specifically for features. So it's kind of a win-win. I should do a whole guide on this. I do have a whole guide on this. I just remembered that I did last year. We'll link to that too in the description below. This was not planned. I really forgot. But this is really everything that I think about when I think about SEO and ASO, and the O part being the same, but really everything else being different. So they should work together. They're not a replacement. I think that's
Exactly.
pretty much all the time we have. We started a little bit late, but we talked about everything I wanted to talk about, which is great. Is there anything else you wanna mention?
Um, I'm I'm trying to think. I had a thought and I lost it, but I think that overall, I'm just excited to see sort of what kind of change that we're going to see in the marketplace in the coming years.
Mm-hmm.
How the app stores shift and change. I'll be very curious to know if there's any influence on AI into how they function and how that you might actually search differently.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things that stands out to me too is just how within Google, if I do a search on my phone or even on my desktop, it kind of knows where I am, which is really
Mm-hmm.
helpful for the kind of results that get populated. It doesn't really happen as much in the app stores. And unless you're, doing some targeted ad campaigns, that can, if you have a business that's geographically located and very focused on, particularly targeting users in a specific area, I think that's an interesting point that is different between the two platforms. But overall, I think you still have to optimize globally on the
Mm-hmm.
App Store, which is different than you do in many ways for SEO as well.
Yeah, that's very
So,
true. And we'll see how that
but
evolves, especially with custom product pages, with A/B testing on both stores. Apple and Google are both saying we're thinking about you very slowly, but eventually we'll give you something that's useful. So yeah, we'll see.
yeah,
All righty.
absolutely. Well,
I
thanks for the time today, Ariel.
thank you for joining us, Kurt. This was really good. It's rare that I get to talk about SEO on this channel, but I love SEO. I think there's a lot that can be gained from it in the world of apps. And thank you for sharing all your experience and advice. We'll have
Happy to be
this.
here.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll share some resources in the description so you can go in and check them later about SEO versus ASO, the guide I forgot about, but also a few other guides about ratings and about other things that can help you get more downloads. So check the description in just a little bit. And that's pretty much it for me. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks again, Kurt, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.